Welcome everyone tonight to our webinar on when public schools reopen. We're really excited to have our guest tonight, and we are hoping for a very informative conversation. As live TV has taught us, we are operating with a few difficulties right now with the internet and getting people on, so be patient with us, but we will keep moving forward to respect your time. And I want to welcome our panelists tonight. We're really excited to have Bryan Proffitt with us. Woodbury is trying to join us, Donald Dunn and Natalie Beyer. And I'll tell you just a little bit about our panelists tonight. Bryan Proffitt is a veteran high school teacher who, and he's an educational organizer and was worked with the co-founder of the 2020 caucus, I believe. He lives and works in Durham. He is our vice president-elect for NCAE, so we're really excited. Bryan, welcome and congratulations on your election. And he is the immediate past president of the Durham NCAE for the past 2 years. And now I'd like to go ahead, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to Woodbury in case she shows up. So you'll know who she is, but she is on the.
Yay, there she is.
There she is. It's a miracle. Shay, so glad to see you. So I was just getting ready to interrupt to introduce you. So you showed up at the right time. Shay is a wonderful friend of public education. She has over 20 years herself as an educator. She is the chair of the Winston, Salem, Forsyth Board of Education. And so we're really excited to have her here with her organizations and experiences and all the many hats that she wears in terms of what she's done with her career. And we have been watching her over there in Winston-Salem, and you're doing a great job as their first chair for an African-American chair in history. So we're really proud to have her here, and we're looking forward to seeing what she has to say. Next, I want to introduce to you briefly my friend Donald Dunn. And Donald is a avid public education and family advocate. He and his family own several daycare centers in Winston-Salem. I've met Donald through his active work in the state PTA and his local PTAs, and now he actually serves as the secretary treasurer of the national PTA. So his work with his PTA locally, state, and now at the federal level, as well as his work, he and his family with child care centers in his local area, bring to us a whole bunch of information about what's going on with our parent community right now. And then last, I introduce you to our friend Natalie Beyer, who is a community volunteer and advocate for equity and excellence in public education. Natalie attended public schools in Durham, and now she is serving on the Durham Board of Education. What a cool thing, Natalie, to be in that situation where you're serving now, where you actually got your own education years ago. So we're really happy to have her there. She and Donald both are on the board for Public Schools First and have done tremendous work in supporting statewide the efforts to make sure we have a strong public education for every child. And so we're going to just jump right in. And one of the things that I also want to take a second to introduce my co-partner tonight, Dr. Terrence Ruth. Terrence and I are working together certainly with Public Schools First, but you know, Terrence is also a parent of a child in public schools. Terrence has been a teacher and a principal, and so he has a lot of experience, a lot of hats that he brings to this conversation. He and I are going to try to guide us through this evening, and anytime you want to interrupt, raise your hand, jump in, or change course. This is really allowed. This is, I hope, to be a casual and conversation, but a meaningful conversation. So I'm going to give us a chance to get started by asking everyone to maybe take a few minutes to reflect on kind of where we are right now. We've been in this remote learning mode for about 2 months, and I'd kind of like to let you share with our audience tonight some of the things that your impressions, your experiences, some of successes and challenges. And anyone who'd like to start, please feel free.
Well, one of the things we've noticed at the PTA, I'm fortunate enough to be interacting with all across the country, and everybody's looking at this in a different angle. School won't be the same as it was when we were in school, or as it was as of March the 13th. Everybody's trying to find the best avenue, particularly the most safe avenue for people to go back. One of the things in recent discussions, we've noticed a lot of children as well as staff are having problems with the adjustment period, and that we're just concerned that we may not need to rush back into a facility. We may need to extend, if the professional healthcare providers are correct, this winter with the flu season combined with COVID-19 could even be a worse situation. So everybody has that looming in the back of their heads.
Yeah, that's a great point, Donald. I was looking at these questions and thinking what we've learned is that education at its heart is about relationships and about face-to-face relationships with people. And I know that our children are missing that our teachers are missing that our principals, educators, custodians, our whole teams are missing that opportunity to be building relationships face-to-face. And remote learning is a poor substitute and will never be a substitute for the quality of education that all of our students deserve in North Carolina, and nor is it equitable. So we're finding most districts don't have one-to-one technology. We don't in Durham. Most districts and many homes, even our teachers, don't have good connectivity in their homes. And so we have a huge digital divide. And it just brings up so many, it shines a light on the inequities within our systems and the way that for the last 10 years, we haven't invested in children in North Carolina. And that we have to use this opportunity to reimagine how we can do school actually better for the next generation.
This is Shay Woodbury. Can you hear me?
Yes,
yes.
ma'am.
Okay, good. So I've spoken, of course, to folk in our community, and my go-to has been, if not for and because of COVID-19. If not for COVID-19, we would kind of still be overlooking the apparent inequities. And now that we have COVID-19, we know that what we thought we were doing, we just haven't been doing much as it relates to our good faith efforts. I think this pandemic has really exposed us to the inequities that I think a lot of us thought we were way more progressive than this. And so there's the gift and the curse of the pandemic. And I think that if we are sincere as a society about working together to decrease inequities and to make sure that all of our children have access to a great school education, then we need to definitely be brave enough to start thinking about closing these inequitable gaps or these inequities and do some things boldly different.
Hey, okay, sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Yes, I mean, I think first, kind of like true to all the things that people just said, but I actually want to take a little bit different angle on the question so as to not be redundant and try to say the same things that everybody else already said better. But this question of like learning, right? Like, and so I think the question is like remote learn. It's not like, we're not talking about remote schooling, because I don't think remote schooling is like a thing that we're going to be able to figure out, at least not from like the place that we began. So I think like if what we're talking about is what we're learning right now, like there's a way that I was that inside the union work we were starting to talk about what is it that educators do every day. And I think one of the things that people are learning right now is that actually the first thing that educators do every day is we keep kids alive. Like we are the human beings that other people send their small human beings to and we keep them alive all day long. And if we weren't there with them, they wouldn't be alive, right? So like the physical, like providing a safe physical space for our society's children to be is the first thing that we do. And everybody kind of gets that a little bit differently now. The second thing we do is we like try to make sure that that there isn't sort of irreparable psychological and emotional harm that gets done to them, right? And so I think people are seeing right now, like, oh, without public schools and without educators doing that, that's actually a really hard thing to do. And if we manage with kids to do the first two things, then we can do the really magical stuff, like teach them how letters sound or physics, right? Or how their bodies work, right? And so the question of like a curriculum almost kind of comes third, but there's actually learning going through that whole process. So I think like if we shifted the conversation to be like, what is learning like in this age of like physical distancing? I think we're learning a lot. I think we're also learning that just because most folks can understand those things I just said in a different way right now, or the inequities that other folks spoke to, doesn't mean that people who are in political leadership or economic leadership of our society are going to respond in kind. I think we're also learning that, like, you know, some of this stuff is being laid bare and how much people care or don't care about the future of our communities and our kids. So I've got success stories as well, but I think we're maybe holding that for a second. But for me, I think there's a lot to learn right now about what the purpose of schools is and what schooling and learning is.
We can't hear you, Dr. Ruth. Okay, so while he's figuring out his technology there, next week, you know, our internet's been going in and out, and I apologize to our guests. I guess a lot of people are on learning right now. So, so kind of shift the lens slightly on this, but one of the things that Terrence was going to be asking you is if you could each go and talk about just a couple things that you think are critical. Everybody keeps talking, we're in phase one, we're moving to phase two, we're just moving along, but what do we think is really critical, must-dos, before we can reopen our schools successfully? And anyone, again, can jump in and start, you know, I want us to be very honest and take your time answering that question.
I personally don't see school starting in August. I have to remind people school is the place. Learning is the activity that happens within the school. So I think we need to take a deep breath. Probably won't put the kids back in physical school until late January, maybe even February. We need to stagger and get orientation and then bring the kids back. Because not only are the kids struggling with this current situation, this is going to be a new experience because about time kids go back to school, they would have been out of school, not physically in the building for almost 6 months. And the teachers have not seen their students, and Bryan brought it up very adequately, I believe, by saying the relationship is so critical and that all of a sudden we're going to have nobody in a building. So what do we do with those buildings and those assets and those resources? But it's so important that kids understand that they're still loved and there's that connection. What I want this conversation to end on, hopefully, is that people understand learning is so important. And the professionals that we have in front of our children Monday through Friday, their role and their responsibility is much more than keepers or monitors of children. They're developers of our next generation. And we need to make sure that mentally everybody is in a good spot and maintain that good condition, that they'll finish out very successful and grow up to be productive adults.
Natalie, you want to jump in?
I was hoping Shay was going to jump in because she's got such wisdom from Winston, Salem, Forsyth.
I think she lost her connection.
She'll be back and we'll get to hear from that. Donald, I share your concern that fall might not be viable, but I do think right now districts are putting together teams of teachers and parents and medical professionals trying to figure that out and trying to figure out, because safety has got to be our top must do, both for our students, but also for our employees. And I'm troubled because North Carolina school districts are one of the largest employers across the state of North Carolina. And so it's an economic impact, both as an education driver, but also providing childcare so that others can get back to work. And so I'm hoping that we can get creative and figure out how to keep safety in mind, but also to keep healing it in mind. I think this has been an incredibly stressful, ongoing pandemic with no end in sight for children, for adults, for seniors, for every person on this planet. And it shows us our connectedness and vulnerability in a way that I don't think we've had in a generation. So I don't know how we do going forward, but I know that districts are aching and longing for strong federal leadership, and we don't have that it doesn't feel like the CDC is actually as progressive as they should be. I know the teachers unions are trying to bring that voice. I heard Randy Weingarten on a webinar last night saying, when we reopen, everything has to be different, but it has to be better, and we can't have children suffer as we rebuild this economy, right? That investment has to continue to be our best first investment going forward. So I don't think I have answers. I think we have more questions than we have answers right now.
Yeah, if I can just riff on Natalie's for a second, a couple of points that Natalie just raised. I mean, I think this question of leadership is really important, right? Like, you know, we went through there was a Great Depression in this country, right? And we reorganized how society worked as a result of that, right? Like, you know, my dad was in the military for 24 years. He and I were talking about this the other night, and he was like, no, you could do this, right? Like, you just have to figure out like good systems for how to do the things. And we could do that if we put the resources into it, right? But that's the question that we have to like figure out right now is like, you know, just even what folks have named, both Donald and Natalie have named about the safety of our folks being the number one thing, right? So like, do we want to rush people back so they don't get, you know, 1 month behind on their reading, but in doing that, someone in their family dies as a result of our inability to like actually take care of the physical conditions. And what people need to know, and this is maybe a thing that most people in North Carolina don't know, is that our buildings are already in terrible shape and are already completely ill-equipped. Like most of like if I went around Durham right now, this is no knock on Durham because Durham is one of the, you know, wealthiest districts in the state, right? If I went around and went to bathrooms and pressed a thing, could I get warm water that would come out for longer than 5 seconds at a time? I bet you I could find maybe 3 sinks in the whole district that would do that. And they'd be in teachers' bathrooms, right? So like even just something like that, like our union folks in Greensboro earlier on this year, like they had a campaign where they were taking thermometers into their classroom and showing the temperature 95 degrees or 48 degrees, right? And just thinking of the physical devastation that underfunding public schools has been forever, right? If we did an audit right now, the buildings in the lead and asbestos, I mean, these are problems that existed before all this, right? And so I think that the thing I want to riff on a little bit about what Natalie raised is the economic engine that public schools are, right? Like what we need more than any, I don't want the national average in per pupil expenditure. The national average is about half what it needs to be. We need to like, if we looked at this moment as an opportunity for economic development and to use our public schools as economic developers, the number of people that we could put to work in construction, the retrofitting of our buildings so that they were energy efficient so we could stop going over the climate change cliff, right? So we could, you know, hire more people to be TAs and bus drivers and haul healthy, you know, health monitors, and put, you know, how do we fund, you know, nurse fast track programs, right? There's a million different ways that we could rebuild our economy based on public schools as the economic machine that they already are. But we have to stop playing pretend like tax cuts for wealthy people to be given to like corporations is what drives our economy. It's not what drives our economy in North Carolina. What drives our economy in North Carolina is public schools. So like right now we could be like, how do we figure out how to build safe, healthy schools that are, you know, green friendly, right? And then put the people in them. If we organize that stuff on the front side, we can do it right. But if we get people in there and then all of a sudden we realize we needed 30 more people in that building to do this right, then, you know, like Donald said, we're sort of like, we go in and then set ourselves back even further, right? So I think there's a lot of really imaginative and creative things that we can do, but it requires more resources. We need double instead of austerity, which we're getting ready to see, we need the opposite, right?
Right. Shay, please jump in. We know you lost your internet and you're back. And you too, Terrence, either both of you share some of your views on this at this point. Terrence, especially yours as a parent too, but Shay, please go.
Thank you. I was going to cede my time to Terrence since he came back on and didn't get to answer the first question. So if he would like to go first to kind of jump in, because we haven't heard from him all night, I will definitely welcome his perspective, and then I'll jump in next. I think his sound is still.
Yeah, we're still having the sound thing.
Yeah, the sound. Okay, Terrence, I have to.
Terrence, you're going to have to come over here and sit next to me next week. We'll sit here with our mask on.
Yeah. So the must do from, you know, I think the school district perspective is always first and foremost safety and security, and that's physical and mental. You know, now more than ever, we have to think about that mental side of being healthy and being safe. And so that is, you know, my right now top priority and ask of our superintendent, that when our children come back, we have a safety plan. I've asked her to find the district a top-notch health team to come on with us and stay for 3 years, because that's how important it is to be proactive, I think, than reactive. So what point does it make that, you know, God forbid something break out and then we have to react to it, instead of a team have come on with Winston, Salem, Forsyth County Schools and really directing our work as it relates to making sure all of our schools and facilities are safe places to work and learn. So safety and security is the must that we need to be prepared for, I think, with our children. I think that when we reopen, we must continue to strengthen digital access, because we know now that that is a part of the 21st century way of learning. Dr. Contreras from Guilford County School, I think she said it best. You all are asking us to change 300 years or 250 years of how we've done something in one night. So that, you know, I say 19th century to 20th century model that we've been running off, it's just not relevant anymore. And really it has stood the test of time to go as long as it had. But 20th century learning model is not coming into the 21st century. And I think that, again, you know, we've been lucky to have it last this long, but of course this pandemic, you know, just have revealed to us that the old way of learning is not relevant anymore. And so what do I mean by the old way of learning? I agree with Mr. Dunn that school is the place. And one of the things that I was part of in Guilford County Schools was Guilford County Schools was one of the first to sort of initiate this personalized learning, because Guilford County Schools received a Race to the Top grant. And so we embarked upon this 5-year endeavor to make sure that middle school kids were, 21st century digital access ready. The point that, I'm making is that a part of the triad of what personalized learning is about, including interest, student interest, and then the need of the student, is also a flexible learning environment. We came to find out that teachers could no longer think about you teach in a classroom. You had to start thinking about flexing your learning environment so that there are different spaces and places for children to learn. And, I would just like to lastly reiterate that, Dr. Contreras, laid that thought out there about, we're expected to do something overnight that we've been doing at least since the 20th century this way. Now we're in the 21st century. And we're going to have to fly the plane and learn how to fly it at the same time, as it relates to what does 21st century learning really looks like. In addition to, because as a society, we haven't dealt with poverty, we haven't dealt with race issues and inequities. So it's that much more intense. But I do think that, society is equipped to do it ideally. But again, I think we're just going to have to make some bold and brave decisions in order to meet our needs.
A couple of things come to my mind as you're talking, and I want to just share them with you and get some reactions. But one of the things that I and others have been pushing for is to look at the internet as a utility. That we're to the point in our society that it's that essential, like water or lights, that when, that it should be, when you may have remembered when Wilson City tried to put internet in as a utility and charge all the citizens for high-speed, reliable internet at very, very low rates. They were blocked by Tom Tillis. And at that time, he was in the North Carolina House. So one of the things that was, as we talk about, maybe I'll just put that seed out there for y'all, is that, when we talk about must-dos, to me, what we've learned is we can put aside where we are. We know that families and parents, teachers need access to high-speed, reliable internet as part of their everyday life, whether it's to check on their doctor's appointments, if we're going to do telemedicine, if we're going to let kids have access to flipped classrooms, if we're going to let kids check on their homework. One of the things that we're seeing right now, I heard a figure this morning, Bryan, that 1 in 5 kids right now are just not in this loop. They're out there right now, not in any loop. Even if they happen to have a device that was delivered, they're not in any loop. So any comments about that? I just to build on what Shay's saying, I think we've moved to the next point of needing more than just, we were told by the General Assembly for many years, Natalie, that we were going to go away from textbooks and we're going to get technology and online books and online courses and online help, but we don't have that now, nor do we have the access.
I mean, I just would respond real quick to that 20% number. I bet that's low.
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy to think that it's only 1 in 5, to be honest. And, and then you look at, again, like, we've been fine living in the state of North Carolina with 1 in 5 kids living in poverty. Like, we've been okay with that for a long time now, right? And so again, you just stack the internet on top of it, and then it's just one more measure of the same phenomenon. And so I think the question we really have to ask ourselves is, like, what kind of society do we want to have? And do we want to have this sort of short-term, profit-driven, let's job over the cliff kind of thing? Or do we want to have something where there's meaningful public institutions? Like you're talking about, like, the internet should be a utility, right? But also we have Duke Power, who runs, pollutes our environment and, puts, like, charges people high rates. So, like, that stuff should probably be public too, right? The things that we need, the basic human needs, right, should be met. And we have the resources to do that, right? We just don't have the political will to do it. So, this is a moment, you know, like, you know, it's 1930, the stock market just crashed. Like, who do we want to be? What do we want to do from here? And I think most of us, when we look around, know that what we want to do is just be able to live, you know, and just have, you know, and not be divided from each other because of race, not be at each other all the time, you know, or worried about whether we're going to get this virus that nobody's taking seriously at the top, like all these things. Like, we don't want that. We want something better. And now we have a chance to do it.
Well, I like what all of you were saying about Shay, when we talk about 21st century, when we when we talk about, you know, what the role of technology has and all that. I think the really ending point I wanted to kind of summarize what I think you're all saying is so critical, is that none of that replaces building relationships one-on-one with your students. I have been going around the state for the last 3 years showing the film Resilience, and I think all of you have probably seen that film. And one of the things it talks about is adverse childhood experiences and the impact of toxic stress, trauma on children in their lives. And of course, I want to just say that what we know is that racism, gender identification, bullying, poverty, these are things that tremendously impact trauma, impact children, and create toxic stress and impact their lives. So thinking about that and all this stuff that we're talking about now, what are we going to have to do, Bryan, to build that, and Donald, to build that better school climate in terms of having helping professionals in our schools? Talk a little bit about, you know, your experiences with having access to nurses or school counselors or school psychologists, social workers. I think that's another thing that I've heard a lot of parents talk about: who's going to talk with our kids when they come back, and who's going to help teachers. They can't talk to 25 kids, you know, at a time and do their instruction. Thoughts that any of you have about that?
Hey, Natalie, how many nurses are in Durham Public School?
Can you imagine, like, the screening that it needs to be done when we go back? If we're going to do temperature checks with infrared, if we're going to have isolation spaces, if anyone is running a temperature or needs to be put somewhere else, like if we're going to clean and disinfect, if we're going to put hot water in every bathroom that where it isn't. We have so far to go. And, you know, our budget this year was an additional $19 million ask of our county commissioners. That was going to get us some more counselors for our high schools. That was going to get us some more ESL and interpreters, because that population is chronically underfunded in the state of North Carolina. 32% of our students are Hispanic and Latino, and many of them need interpretation at regular school meetings.
$15.
We put $15 an hour as minimum wage, like every other state employee. And, you know, the fact that school employees were left out of that legislation and that budget item is unforgivable, right? So our $19 million ask has already been pared down to $6 million that the county might scrape together for us. And they're going to blame it on the pandemic locally. They're going to blame it on the pandemic at the state level. And we need everybody registering folks to vote, everybody doing their census, everybody getting out and talking to anybody in elected office and saying, this is the time to reimagine what North Carolina can be. And this goes for pre-K all the way up through our community colleges and our university system and the public university system, because this is not just a K-12 issue. It is a pipeline of learners that North Carolina needs to create to lead our way forward out of this. So I don't know if I answered your question, Yvonne, but that's what's on my heart.
You did, and you moved right into the next kind of thing about what needs to happen at central office and what needs to happen in our school site. So please continue, Shay.
Yvonne, I just wanted to respond to Bryan's question. He didn't say, and what about in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County? We're 1 to 1,000. And it's nothing to laugh about, but you got to laugh now to stop from crying and just going stir crazy. That is criminal.
Well,
And
I
I
told
can say it because I don't work for Winston Forsyth County Schools, so nobody can fire me. It's criminal. And I think that you're right, Bryan. We're going to have to make a real hard decision in our country about how we wish to sustain and even think differently about our democracy, so that it does include the people. And like you said, now people just truly understand that life isn't about driving 10 cars and I can only drive one at a time. I think people starting to realize that, hey, if it wasn't for mercy and grace, how did I end up living through the pandemic and caught the virus, and somebody else suffered miserably? And I think, quite a few of us now in this country just thinking about, let's just live as good people, human beings, look out for one another and move on. And I think the best place to really start to teach that is in the public school, because that's where all of us come together. And really a lot of times by no choice, because most of us just can't afford, private or all those other options, if you will. Public school is our best bet to recover from this pandemic. So I'm very grateful to hear people like you all talking about how do we move forward and just thinking so critically about this. Absolutely.
And so when we talk about one of the things I've just got to shove in here really quick so I don't miss it before I move over to the more looking at elected officials and their roles. A lot of folks right now are concerned about communication. They're just, I've heard a lot of teachers talking about they're not getting the support they need from central office. I hear a lot of people at the local school, they're not getting it with their principals. Parents are concerned. Any thoughts on how we can improve communicating with parents and with teachers and with our leaders at the schools? Or I just want to throw that out there because so many teachers are saying to me, we don't know what's going to happen this summer. We don't feel like we're part of the conversation on how we start back. And maybe that's not true in all areas of the state. We're in the Triangle, and we tend sometimes to have more access to politicians and to the actual General Assembly. But what do y'all think? Is this, what can we, what are teachers so concerned about? What can we do to help them? What can we advocate?
Well, I think personally that teachers are going to just have to take the baton. Don't ask us to, oh, superintendent, principal this, take it. And what we've learned is that here in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County, some of our best ideas have come from teachers emailing the superintendent, and thank goodness her communication line is very open. And so one of our ideas through this new learning environment is called Flex Fridays. One of our teachers said, hey, on Friday, let's just scale back a bit because, we're wearing, children thin, parents are getting stressed out. So let Friday be a day where children and parents and teachers can do more reflection, do more based on what children want to do. But it would just be a flexible Friday. And we were like, great idea. And so I think that we need to be supportive and empower teachers to take on the leadership to help us to get through this, because this is such, I think, a devastatingly awesome issue that there can be no one person that fixes this situation. I think that now more than ever, our teachers are going to have to help us to lead and come up with the ideas. But I would just say lastly, in defense of teachers, because that's what I am fundamentally, and I always tell people at any given point in time I can teach in North Carolina public schools because my license stay current. But my point is that without teachers, we wouldn't even have the idea of a flipped classroom. That's a teacher innovative thought, and I was so impressed that two science teachers, I can't remember which state these two guys came from, but they created that design and offered it to us now to use in a very relevant way, because like you said, Yvonne, flipped is probably going to be how we phase back in, meaning children come 2 days and then they off a day, just trying to limit, as much of that exposure possibly as possible. So I think that teachers will have to take on their own sense of agency. And then I think we'll all have to be patient with each other, because no one told us to prepare for this. And so district level folk, I believe, all over the state and country trying to figure out how to do what we're doing now with supporting teachers. We were not doing the job probably at even 50% because the resources and all of that stuff. So like I said, now it's just that much more magnified. And so the stress that teachers had before, now there are times 1,000 as it relates to the district doesn't know what we do. The district is not a part relatively on how we need to teach and learn. And now there's a pandemic and we hadn't fixed it before that. So, I would just tell teachers to be patient and be empowered and just help us to fix this thing as best as possible.
Yvonne, I think you started on a good path with the original question, talking about we can go from pre-K, from early childhood, all the way up to colleges and universities. North Carolina continues to have some of the largest and best colleges and universities, but a lot of this starts back in K to 12, but really this is our moonshot moment. And I keep telling people, throw away everything that we have perception of as far as public education. This is our opportunity to start all over, to get us on the path that we need to go on. And I think it was Shay who said that we're lucky that our public education system has operated the way it has for the last 200 some years. So now let's throw everything out and see what's the best. And if it's teachers stepping up being teacher leaders, that's great. If that's parents becoming more involved, that's even better from my point of view. But even if the community of business leaders come in and don't try to run public education like a business, this is not dollars and cents. This is life and death for a lot of people. And public education, public facilities have driven this state, and it will continue to drive this state. If you just look at the rural areas of North Carolina that are literally blowing away, because people, once they get a certain age, they leave and never come back. So we need to look at ways to strengthen from Manio to Murphy this economy in this state. And it's not rushing back into schools, but it's a matter of let's see what we can do to make things better, because normal's gone. That's a word of our past. We need to look at, let's see how we can be exceptional. Let's see how we can be better than another state. Let's see how we can make the learning experience more enriching for all our children, not just those who are fortunate enough to live in certain zip codes. Let's see if we can put our teachers back where they need to be as far as earning. And not just the teachers, but I'm looking at the non-classified people as well, because teachers have continued to receive money. Will the non-classified, the custodians, the bus drivers, and the cafeteria staff continue to be paid going into the new year? That's a huge question that no one's really confronting. So we need to start looking at how can we, from the ground all the way up to the penthouse, how can we make our situation better and make North Carolina the role model that Governor Hunt had us on, Governor Stanford had us on, because in between those two governors, we have kind of lost our way, and we need to get back on the right path to make us the state that we all want the students in the country to look up to.
So I've kind of shifted our slide here to kind of start honing in on these elected officials and the school boards, the commissioners, the legislators, and even I think I should add their Congress. Because I think that one of the things that we have the opportunity to do now with all these really strong and powerful concepts you're throwing out there is how do we take these things now and what are the responsibilities? What do we need to be putting pressures on our school boards, our commissioners, our legislators? As an example, I'll throw out for school boards, Donald, one of the things I've been pushing some of my school board friends on is they're putting together teams to talk about reopening. I don't see that parents are on there. I don't see any students on there. And I think there are some teachers getting pulled into this a little bit, but I wonder if we shouldn't be putting the pressure on our school boards to reach out to engage parents in this fight a little bit more.
I think all stakeholders, the educators, the teachers and parents particularly, and even some students who were able to help advance the conversation, because they're the ones going to be affected first. And as I talk to parents on a daily basis, they look up to Bryan and his peers and Shay and everyone from the standpoint they're dealing with 1 or 2, maybe 3 kids. They said they cannot imagine dealing with 30, 35 kids at a time. And for them not to be part of, now the conversation is, well, when I was home with my son or daughter, this is what I experienced. Now, how can we make the experience for these other 30 some odd kids in the classroom better by having that discussion? And when we cannot leave any of the stakeholders out, because if we start leaving people out, we're going to be back in the same situation, not because of a pandemic, but because tragic mistakes we make now that will affect us going forward.
So what do we need to tell our elected officials? Bryan, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm chomping at the bit on a couple of things that people have said. I mean, you know, again, I have a little bit of a vested interest in this question, but I've spent the last 20 years of my life getting here for a reason. Like, I want to put in something about unions here, and in particular, the role of unions of educators, right? Like, because like Shay, what you're saying is correct, right? It's that nobody else has the expertise about how kids learn, about what happens in the course of a day, like the people who are with them all day long, right? Like, I'm a high school teacher. I don't know how to teach somebody how to read, because that's a skill that a 3rd grade teacher has and a 2nd grade teacher has. And that's a very different thing than what I do as a high school history teacher, right? And so there's nobody that can answer those questions better than that. There's nobody who cares about our kids more than our parents, right? And so, like, there's been a thing that we've been trying to figure out how to shift the conversation in the union, right? And we've been really fortunate to be able to do it here in Durham with the school, you know, with the school board members that we've elected, with county commissioners that we've elected at times, right? Is to say, like, actually, who shares an interest here, right? You know, when we did things like the Decline to Sign movement, we got our school boards to sue the state with us, standing together, right? When we talk about like the problems that need to be solved in our school, instead of having like a kind of model that teaches antagonism between school leaders and their staff, that's just because the superintendent turns screws on them, they turn screws on their staff. Like, instead of all of us looking at each other and being like, well, the parents are the problem because they're not involved enough. And the teachers are like, you know, and then the parents are like, well, that teacher doesn't care. And all these different ways that we're at each other, like, when we act together, right? Like, Phil Berger's team is way smaller than ours. It's way smaller than ours. And so what we're trying to do with the union is say, like, look, like, let's fight to defend and transform public schools. Who is behind that? Who can get with that? Every school board in the state ought to be able to get with, like, hey, it'd be cool if we had more money to, like, have working sinks and nurses, right? And so, like, instead of like people just kind of the territoriality and people thinking, well, I'm on the board, so I have more, you know, like, no, we're on the same team and Phil Berger's on the other team. So, like, how do we get on the same page with each other about these things and move together, right? So, like, on May 1st, right? May 1st is powerful because the teachers are out there, but also because the parents are out there, and the bus drivers are out there, custodians are out there, and the school board members are out there, and the legislators are out there, and county commission, like that's our team. So, like, let's get our team together and let's put the people who know the most at the center. And that's educators and parents and kids and healthcare professionals and the people who have to get us food every day. Like, that's the people who know stuff right now. So, like, we're trying to build a union because when you ask one teacher a question, it's different than asking a union teacher, because the union teacher is invested in knowing what their coworkers are about, right? So instead of just, you know, random teacher voices, like, we actually need to build educator organization, and school boards need to look at that as an asset, and superintendents need to look at that as an asset, and county commissioners need to look at it as an asset, because we can move voters. We can get down to the bottom and find out what our people need and bring that back, so you don't have to have 1,000 conversations. You just talk with union leaders because they're trained to know stuff. Anyway, I'll step off that box now.
No, I think that's really important, Bryan. And I think, you know, you talked about Phil Berger's vision, That's one way to look at things. We know what Betsy DeVos's vision is, right? I mean, we've seen that. We've seen kind of flawed education policy when Arnie Duncan was secretary. So it also goes to, you know, what is Joe Biden's platform going to be? And he's included union leadership deliberately in that unity platform for education. So it's not rocket science. We don't have data. We're not going to have data to have A through F letter grades. That's okay. We never should have had them anyway, right, in North Carolina. So what are we going to start doing? We should build this vision, and it's look at a private school brochure. It's small class size. It's high quality instruction. It's gracious. It's outdoor learning and creative play and collaborative thinking, and you know, it's brilliance. It's knowing each child as an individual and finding their gift. It's stopping this assembly line model of here's what you need to learn when you're 6 years old just because you're 6 years old. That has never worked in this country. It's pulling back that agrarian calendar. Why don't we have calendar flexibility to actually take care of children in a more year-round fashion that takes care of families as well? You know, it's not hard. It's just let's come together in a partnership and build a vision that is different than the past and is radically more equitable. And I have to shout out our teachers, our bus drivers, our custodians, who have, in the flip of a switch, adapted and have been out feeding students and been out getting instructional materials and figuring out ways to celebrate our graduates. We have not asked any industry to completely morph the way these teachers have been doing, and they've been champions across the state of North Carolina. And we have to lift up our people and the heart that they have for these children. They're amazing.
So now, one of the things that someone mentioned last week was the interconnectivity of the social issues around us with public education. You've talked about it with racism, poverty, but you know, we also know that this state has been pushing for expanding Medicaid. So when we look right now at the fact that so many families have no access to health care, how's that going to work? As Donald says, we might be in for wave 2. We're in, you know, how's it going to work in terms of testing for illnesses, whether it's the, you know, I will tell you this, I had a parent tell me last week, and I want y'all to react to this. She said, well, I'm really glad to see we're going to have some testing at some point for all of us. Hope it, you know, is free for all for the COVID-19. She said, but you know what? Last year, I never could take my kids to get a flu test. You know, I had people and, you know, friends that would get their kids at work tested for the flu and get them on medication that would help alleviate the symptoms. I didn't have health insurance. I didn't take my kids for a flu shot. Well, that broke my heart. You know, while I'm glad that we are going to have, you know, at some point have testing for COVID-19, the whole issue of the societal ills around us that are impacting our kids in terms of lack of health care, lack of access to healthy food, lack of secure housing. How can we continue to ignore these before, and certainly can we afford to ignore any of this in the future?
Yvonne, I just wanted to shout out to Bryan, because I'm also social studies history teacher, so I knew it was something about you. You can always tell social studies teachers, well, we can go out there, right? We're gonna make this whole world better. But I just appreciate you're the model of really who should be leading on school boards. I won't even get off on that tangent because it's probably right now politically, like, you know, uncomfortable that school boards should be made up of teachers, educators, right? Or some hybrid of such. That's another issue. But I do want to say that we can't politicize this thing, because children are way beyond red and blue. black and white, even children. And what I mean by that is they want somebody to provide the best health care, the best teaching, the best whatever, and they're not going to be stuck on in a state of shock because, wow, my teacher is this or that. They just want the opportunity to learn. And I think this is why there is even a cultural divide in school between the adults and the children, because they just don't see things the way that we have in a black or white lens. They're much more sophisticated than that. And so we kind of fall behind in trying to teach them when we see things either this or that. But Yvonne, just to lastly add credits to, when we think about public schools in the 21st century, I mean, Jeffrey Canada was 30 years before his time, and he paid a price, but now his motto is where we need to be. The whole school community idea, the Harlem Zone has been for, decades now, talking about how you start with the child in the woman's womb, and then you provide a whole community school idea. And I'm very excited now in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County. We finally was awarded a $30 million Choice Neighborhood Grant, which will give us an opportunity to ideally build a new school in one of our distressed neighborhoods, and hopefully use this as a tool for economic development and rejuvenation, and to take that school and make it a place where people can come and receive health care. Make it a place where the community sees that as an opportunity to grow and exist, not just, oh, that's the schoolhouse, but that's a community space where, all of us have an opportunity to learn and grow. So in my mind, Yvonne, I guess the short answer to your response with how do we respond to the whole child need is the whole school, the whole community school model, which I think we can learn a lot from through Jeffrey Canada's Harlem Zone model.
I want to now, if you guys would let me, kind of get us to take a deep breath. We're getting some questions coming in, and I want to give our audience who've been really, listening and hanging in there with us a chance to say a few comments or ask a few questions. And then before we hang up tonight, we will go ahead and give you guys a chance to circle back. But here's one person, I'm an ESL teacher, and remote learning is not equitable for my kids. Many of them have no internet. Same time, I'm afraid to return as a teacher because my husband is on the list of people who could be exposed and could suffer, could die. So all these things need to be considered. Has anyone been, what are your thoughts about how can we keep teachers safe, and will teachers be fired if they don't return because of their own COVID-19 concerns for their health? Anybody want to share any things that come to your mind there? This is a theme in these questions and comments a lot, and I think I shared with you, Bryan, an email that someone had sent to me, people being very concerned about, would we at least talk about the logistics of, can teachers be held responsible and fired? I don't know. What do we do about, spreading kids out 6 feet apart and making them wear a mask? A couple of the parents are concerned about that, about the harm of that. Any comments you want to make?
Yvonne, I think at districts, as we work on these plans, have to take into account and have to ask our people how they're feeling and whether they feel they or their family members are at risk. And I think we have to come up with safe job situations for them. We can't do anything that puts people at risk. There was a survey that showed that, 1 in 5 principals are over the age of 55, and 1 in 4 teachers maybe over the age of 55. I mean, we don't even know what risks all the way are. There is so much still unknown about this virus. And we thought kids were safe, and now we're seeing maybe not. I mean, maybe not at all. We know that pregnant women are at risk. So, I mean, We know that people don't want to have to disclose their asthma or their diabetes to their coworkers, but that alone puts them at risk. So I think one of the first things that districts are going to need to do is listen to our employees one by one and find out what their concerns are for themselves and their students, and their families. We talked earlier about communication and teachers not feeling like they're heard. That's a lot of what we're missing, is that face-to-face interaction and those water cooler talks where teachers could get their principals to listen to them or their colleagues and the word could get around. These Zoom meetings are awful. They're an inadequate substitute for real communication. And so, that I heard today from teachers, our central office is having 8 a.m. Zoom calls. Well, why are we doing that? People are at home with their own children to manage. Why are we doing 8 in the morning? You're sitting in front of a camera. I mean, we've got to keep working on that two-way communication, and we've got a lot of work to do listening to folks. But the concern about the ESL students is profound. The concern about our EC students is profound. So we're trying to survey folks in Durham to see what connectivity folks have, what they need. At the same time, we're trying to feed children. First and foremost, feed children still. I rambled.
Natalie, I think you raised a great point from the district perspective. I would just like to add that the State Board of Education was very intentional about how they defined remote learning instead of e-learning. So remote learning just means that, well, let me say it like this. Remote learning gives us an opportunity to teach, in a non-traditional way. So there is no strict dependency on technology in remote learning. So maybe remote learning is children pick up their packet of information and then take it back home. Maybe remote learning is that teachers or a counselor drop off some work and then somebody go and pick it back up. So the state has been very intentional, the State Board of Education, in saying, oh no, it's not that remote learning is strictly dependent upon technology, because we know throughout the state, especially in the more rural areas, it's not even a conversation about digital access and children learning, except that people from the school district, currying information back and forth to home. So that's the ideal behind, remote learning. And to some degree, it, allows us to at least stop in on our children and say, hey, how you doing? And it's not the most ideal, but for a lot of teachers, just to see that their children that they know generally need more support, they're doing okay. And there's a safe way to do it. And I just really urge school districts to work with their local health department, or bring in some experts to help us to figure out how to stay in contact in a safe way, as safely as possible. But I think you raise a great point, Yvonne, with our exceptional children, no matter what their learning specialized needs are, how are we staying in contact, and what deficiency do they continue to be exposed to because of this new way of learning, even though remote learning doesn't necessarily dictate strictly digital.
And so another question here is, how do you guys feel about, is it time that we move to universal nutrition feeding, food programs?
Yes, statewide, because this epidemic has shown us the main thing that we want to do is feed children. So why did it take this for us to worry about children getting the most nutritional meals that they get? And we need to extend it because we're going to be reimbursed from the federal government. So there's no need for us to keep, especially with North Carolina being such a big agribusiness state, that would be more enticement for us to make sure we have universal meals from kids from birth all the way up to, even through college, because a lot of our college kids are struggling with not having meals throughout the day.
Yeah, so I mean, that was I'm gonna actually circle back and end at that point from where I was hoping to start. So it's interesting, right? Like Natalie, like you raised the thing about the district trying to figure out two-way communication, like going forward, how to get in touch with parents, right? So like, again, like you say, I'm not really technically going to be employed by Durham Public Schools for too much longer, so I'm going to say things out loud right now. But I would have done it up till now too, but like, there's actually a school in Durham where there's been two-way communication with every family. I think there's like 30 families that they haven't found out of a school of like several hundred families, like two-way communication with those families every week for the last 4 weeks, right? Where we're gathering data about people's health needs, people's like food needs, people's money needs. They're raising money to start meeting those needs directly, like trying to get people cash cards. That's happening at a community school in Durham, right? But when the district starts to try to figure out how they want to roll out a communication plan, like no one asks us at this community school where they know this is one of the things that we've taken up as a lead project, right? So like that, this is an example of, right, the ways in which, because the structures we've set up, we don't listen to the folks who are developing the expertise on the ground, right? And so like, if we then like these community school models that we're trying to build here, right? The main thing is like, how do we approach problem solving differently? How do we approach problem solving from a way where we deeply ask people what it is that they need and what they experience as the barriers to getting those things met? And then you identify problems and you ruthlessly get at the roots of those problems, right? So circling all the way back to like, if we have a problem where we have all these people who are at high risk, who are going to be asking to go into buildings, right? Like, yeah, we do have to make sure that all of our kids are fed. We also need to make sure that everybody has the ability to survive economically in our whole society. We need to make sure that everybody has food and a house, right? And a basic, like, the survival, because then you don't, like, we're talking about how much we love our frontline workers, like people who are going into, working McDonald's right now. Like, they're not heroes. They're getting forced into this because they wouldn't be able to survive otherwise. Like, they're heroes in the ways that like working class people like do everything to make our society run, but like they're not choosing to do that. If we had a situation where everybody could get their needs met, then a 65-year-old teacher with health risks or a 20-year-old, 22-year-old TA who takes care of their father wouldn't have to make that choice, right? And then what we could say is, what if, again, we looked at changing roles in schools and having, people be hired as health monitors, make sure they're getting $15 to $20 an hour, train some people, build a whole new army of people who aren't at risk, who need an income, who could do useful things, right? But like, we'd have to actually get at the roots of problems in order to do that. And to do that, we have to make sure that people don't feel compelled, right? And if we don't feel compelled and we offer people who do make the choice to work, if we give them personal protection, if we give them safe rules and regulations, if we give them hazard pay, and we take care of them, there's gonna be a lot of people who wanna do that, right? But like, we gotta come up with money if we wanna do that.
Well, and Bryan, what you just said reminded me of the fastest executive order that was signed in this whole pandemic was to reopen the meatpacking plants, right? And it was to force people into unsafe working conditions because we all need the meat supply to stay constant. And it was not to protect them, it was to prevent them from suing their employers. And so that's exactly how upside down everything has been and continues to be in this. And those folks working in meatpacking plants in North Carolina, those are our parents. Those are our families. And those children and those families are living in terror, just like other frontline healthcare workers' families, from the risk and the greater risk that they're at because of the exposure.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Natalie. I want to make sure I slip in a few more comments that people are making, because they're mostly are saying amen, thank you, yes, Bryan, yes, Natalie, yes, Shay, yes, Donald. But they're also saying that they're really supportive of the concept we need a union. because they're saying that if we have more, the more we have a group, a union to support us, the more equitable it will be. Like they're saying, some folks in Greensboro have no
Hey,
voice.
Yvonne, can I stop you real quick?
Yeah.
We have a union. It's called NCAE. And a union isn't a magical, mythical creature that swoops in to save you. It is the thing that you step into and you contribute to and you help build. So we have a union. It's called NCAE. It's the thing that is the most important organization in the state and the thing that is like what is the barrier between us and the cliff. So come be part of our union. We'll
I
get you
think
involved.
that plus that these workers are going to McDonald's and these people who are going to do.
Everybody needs a union. That's right.
Okay,
Everybody.
so yeah, because we have some teachers that are getting represented because you have NCAE or you have the Wake version and the Durham version, the Greensboro, but they're saying there's nobody representing those people. They have to go to work or they're not going to have to be able to pay their rent, right?
15 in a union for everybody.
I can sit home because I work in a group, a place that's going to pay me to go home and work. I just throwing that out there. And I think Bryan's saying join NCAE and work.
I would just like to definitely support NCAE through, of course, our local chapter, FCAE, and they have been extraordinarily brave and collaborative with the school district. And today, Natalie, I know that you can sympathize with me a little bit here, but it wasn't a tense presentation to the county, our preliminary budget. I will say that our county commissioners, are supportive of education. But our superintendent went before them today and asked for more money for our classified staff. And it was like, is she asking money for FCAE? They have been at the heart of that. They have held us accountable for that. They have worked collaboratively with the school district to make sure that even in a pandemic, we would be bold enough and brave enough to go to our county commissioners and ask for about a $26 million ad, Natalie, because that was one of our asks, compensate classified, right? And if I hate to go out on this ledge, but if they don't, we're going to figure it out because our superintendent is committed to, the word that we made to FCAE and classified staff that we're going to increase pay and make it competitive with the rest of the county positions that are comparable, right? So we know that when we did our study of positions compared to other county positions, our positions were, paid lower. So I applaud, the North Carolina Association for Educators because it is a union by way of substance, even if we don't sometimes recognize it technically because of the laws in North Carolina. But pound for pound by substance, it is. I think it unionizes educators in North Carolina.
2 more questions, and one of them's about school boards and one of them's about the NCAE. So let's get them out there. So someone said, is the NCAE seems to only be Democrats? I think we should answer that question because it is one that's leveled all the time. And I think it's important for us to discuss it. Bryan, I think you'd be good to start on that.
I would love to answer that question. Yeah, like when I say Phil Berger's on the other team, I don't mean Republicans. I mean, Phil Berger is a version of a cruel version of, everybody out for themselves politics that have taken over the leadership of the Republican Party. We live in North Carolina where the latter half of the 20th century was like, we move forward as the progressive beacon in the South, right? In the ways that, folks, I think it was Donald was saying about, Governor Hunt's period, right? Like, this is when there was a consensus between Republicans and Democrats in this state about what our priorities were going to be. We built a world-class university system, right, with, I believe, the highest percentage of public HBCUs as part of its state system, right? We built, you know, a model pre-K program, right? We funded K-12, you know, far superior to anybody else in the South, right? And that's because there were Republicans who believed in public schools, right? When Berger and these folks took over, right, the tenor shifted. And it was part of a national movement that's funded by people who want to privatize everything. And they said, this is what a Republican is. And there are so many Republicans in this state that know that our kids need good stuff. Because you know what? They have kids and their kids need good stuff. So what I would say to people who don't think there's a place for Republicans in NCAE, or that they don't see enough Republicans being supported by NCAE, then they should put forward people inside their party who are going to put forward a different version of politics. And it's not okay with us having the lowest unemployment, you know, payments of folks. That is not okay with ruin, you know, like a lot of our Republican, you know, that Republican base comes from rural communities. Rural communities are being devastated by the lack of expansion of Medicaid, right? That's where the hospitals are closing, right? That's where people aren't getting access to the healthcare that they need, right? That's Republicans living throughout the state. So there's no R on this question, right? Like Phil Berger took this thing in a different direction, and there's a lot of really good folks with really good values that call themselves Republican that are on the same team as me, that are on the same team as you, Yvonne. We just need to get rid of this Phil Berger guy.
Well, and I would remind us, Yvonne, that in North Carolina 10, 12 years ago, Democrats were in charge, and NCAE, on behalf of students, advocated for what students needed. And I mean, it doesn't matter who's in charge. NCAE is going to be the voice on behalf of what students need. And that's been their mission, right? I mean, they can speak up on behalf of what students, educators need. And it doesn't matter. It just happens to be Republicans in control of the General Assembly right now. But that's not the history of North Carolina over the long term.
And I was here at the legislature in 2006 and 2008 and 2010 and 2011. And we pushed really hard against the governor, Perdue, who made the cuts and made the deal with the feds to lift the caps and charters. We were very critical of what then was a Democratic governor. And so there have been
a Democratic president and his Democratic Secretary of Education. Right. You know, like it was the Clinton administration that opened the door for charter expansion.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. And then we saw what you know, Obama's administration did awful things. So we've all, if people will really search the history of public education advocates, whether it's the PTA or NCAE or Public School First or the Public School Forum, it has always been advocating on the behalf of children and educators. And unfortunately, sometimes that has taken a, it is also labeled by people's political parties. So let's go on from that. Someone wants to know school boards, one school board's doing this, one school board's doing that. What can we do to unionize the school boards, to get school boards to be acting together? Wouldn't that be more powerful and we get more bang out of making some of these issues come forth? Where's that's the question. Can y'all unionize?
I don't think so, because we're not employees. We're elected officials, but I will shout out the North Carolina School Board Association, which brings together all of the school boards in North Carolina and was led at one point by one of my mentors, who Natalie would definitely know, Miss Minnie Fort Brown. And it, like I said, North Carolina School Board Association is actually it's an organization that I think with, you know, more advocacy from the public to be strengthened to represent school districts across the state could possibly be doing more. But, you know, I'd rather err on the side of, I'm going to, you know, not talk in a deficit way about the North Carolina School Board Association. But if we don't pay dues, then it can't operate effectively. And, you know, it just has a limitation of resources. But the folk that I know that's there through North Carolina School Board Association. You know, they do a great job. They helped us to find our superintendent through their services. So, you know, I would suggest to the citizens of North Carolina to, you know, advocate for the strengthening of the North Carolina School Board Association, so that the school boards throughout our state can be empowered through being unified.
Okay.
I would also say, Shay, that we tend to have some senior, long-serving school board members sometimes across the state. And if folks have concerns where they're not representative of the values of your community or they're out of touch, go recruit a teacher, a retired educator, a young progressive parent, and run that candidate in your local community to make your school board represent the values of your community. That, I think, is the best thing about school boards, is you can turn us over and change us if we're not advocating and fighting for what our community needs.
Okay, so I'm going to move to closing remarks, and I'm going to let Bryan start first because I have a question to squeeze in his closing. Several people have asked it. Are unions legal?
I'm going to answer that very quickly and yield the rest of my time to Donald. So one, there is no law that prohibits unions in North Carolina. There is Jim Crow era law that limits the rights that unions have legally, right? The second answer to the question is, like, it was never that unions were legal and then workers organized them and then their bosses respected them. It was that workers organized and they forced the people in power to respect them. So we don't just because we don't have legal collective bargaining rights doesn't mean we didn't shut down 53 school districts and put 30,000 people in the streets. So we have to act like what we want to be. So that's what we got.
Natalie, I was going to say, one group of elected officials who seem to get a pass, and I don't understand why, are county commissioners. If educators and citizens really want to change, they need to put leverage on the county commissioners that they continue, because they have money. And anytime, for example, our custodians in schools get paid less than a custodian in another governmental building. So anytime that we need money, is always the first place we need to do is go to county commissioners, because we see them every day at the store, at the service station, or at the ball field or whatever. But county commissioners should be the next people that we really put a lot of pressure on to fund our schools adequately, but also give the necessary additional resources that we will have healthy environments for not just the teachers, but also the students.
Donald, to just add credits to what you're saying, some of our county commissioners have said that they wish the state would change the law, that the money would just come directly to the school district. They don't know why they're the middleman for, that allocation of funds. And therefore, Mr. Dunn is right. I'm on my best behavior when I go before county commissioners. And that's hard to do when you social studies teach, right? And so I think that that's something as a state, like Natalie was saying, as citizens, we need to, put a little pressure on our legislators about, those kinds of things that they could fix by way of just changing the law. There are a lot of states where school funding through the state doesn't come to the county commissioners, then the school district. And our superintendent actually comes from a state, our current one, where this is sort of brand new to her, because, she could live in her own taxes and the money came straight to her, and there was no bargaining and politicizing education. And that's, one of our greatest concerns.
I will say one thing about the commissioners really fast. One of the things that they are responsible for, and I do think it is totally responsible for, is capital and capital improvements. And some of the things Natalie and Bryan and different people mentioned tonight, making sure your bathrooms work, your facilities have hot water, that you're, that you're that you have those kind of things in your schools. We should absolutely, Donald, not be passing on county commissioners right now for doing those things in the building to clean them and repair them and refurbish them. They're getting federal money too. Every county right now is getting federal care money. So this is y'all didn't ask me, but I'm just jumping in here. This is something that I absolutely think that we should at minimum be expecting the county commissioners to cough up their CARES money on. The other thing I'll say is on the other side, which someone points out here in a comment about commissioners real fast, is that it has caused a lot of inequity across the state when commissioners have had to step in and fill the local funds. They're saying, in a way, Shay, that they agree that the state should be funding for every single child what is needed to educate every single child, so that we're not going and paying different supplements or different luxuries where one county has art and music and another county doesn't even have a librarian full-time. Where in Wake County, we don't have enough social workers. We have a social worker for every two schools. There are 5 or 6 counties in the state that have no social workers, or one nurse that's shared from the public health department. So there is some caution they're asking me to point out in making sure that we hold accountable for capital, but we at minimum start really pounding the federal and the state level, because if we're going to have equity for rural and urban counties, we've got to do something about that. So who didn't get to have closing remarks? Anyone before I close this out? I think we've answered. I want to say to our guests, if we didn't get to your question, if you will email us, I will make sure I poll everybody and get those answers back out to you when we send you a link to the recording. So don't discourage. But did anyone else want to add anything before we? Natalie, did you get a chance to close?
I think we've said almost everything I wanted to say, Yvonne. I just, it occurs to me that we're talking about building the next vision forward, and there's been no playbook for this. No superintendent is trained in how to run a district in pandemic. Teachers aren't trained in how to teach remotely when they really want to be face to face. And the science is still being built as we go, but we are still here. We're listening. You can email us, you can call us. Shay will answer the phone, I'm sure. We need to do this together as a community, and we need to hear from our parents, from our educators, from our employees and folks as we build a vision forward.
Okay, and I'm going to let that start wrapping it up for us, but I do want to encourage you to go to our website at Public Schools First NC, resources, fact sheets. We've put together a fact sheet on what we think, from listening to everybody, we ought to be doing with schools open. And it talks about universal nutrition programs, and it talks about pre-K, and it talks about Medicaid and testing. And we'd like for your input and your suggestions, because we'll keep editing it and changing it and uploading it. We've been sending this to the General Assembly members every time we update it, because we think that we want to make sure that we're not overlooked on this, and I appreciate y'all checking in on it. I also want to encourage you to go to our website and look at this page under issues, which is all about resilience. And we have a ton of resources here to talk about trauma. We have a special page on the website about COVID-19 issues around trauma and things you can look at, resources for teachers and for parents. So we encourage you to please go there. And if you have great resources that we haven't looked at, we're missing out on, we ask you to please send those to us. Anything that's on our website is yours. We are not prideful or elitist about anything. If we put something together, we've gotten it from lots of places of reading and learning, and it's out there for you to copy and cut and paste and use for all good, I hope. And we invite you to send us more information. We have had, this is the second of our series dealing with when public schools open. We have some great sessions coming up. in the next 2 weeks. There's the dates, next 2 Thursdays at 8 o'clock. And these are on our Facebook page. You go and register. And we have other school board members coming on. We have some teachers. We have other parents. And we have joining us over the next couple of weeks, we have someone from NC Justice Center who does a lot of research on public schools. We have someone from the Public School Forum talking about their reporting on ACEs and trauma. So we have some really good conversations coming up. So don't forget, we are recording. We will post this on the website. And, you know, as they always say, you know, the wrap up is like us, tweet us, follow us, watch us, join our YouTube channel, whatever you can do. Because what we're really here to say is that we're a small group of folks, mostly a lot of volunteer time that goes into what we do at Public Schools First, great board members, but we're really here to be the advocate for our educators and for our students to make sure that every child has an opportunity to do what our Constitution says, to have a sound basic education that is not reliant on one's race or gender or zip code or income. And if we're really going to make that happen, now is the best time to start again on that journey. We have not gotten there. And this is a chance, as all of you have said tonight to our audience, to start back. When our schools reopen, let's reopen stronger. Let's reopen meeting our constitutional rights that we owe every child in North Carolina. So thank you all for being here tonight. I appreciate it. I hope that our audience appreciated it. And thank y'all very much for all your hard work on behalf of children and on behalf of teachers. I appreciate each of you very, very much and your dedication. And with that, I'll say good night and hope to see all of you very soon.
Good night.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Thank you, Yvonne.
See you later. Bye.
Bye.